Shared ownership. Sounds amazing, right? Buy a home for half the price. Well, not so fast.
The biggest pro, of course, is that you are getting on the property ladder, and over time you can increase your ownership all the way up to 100%.
Shared ownership sounds like a smart way to get onto the ladder, but I've seen people walk away with almost nothing.
The idea of staircasing is amazing. I love it. But with the way that wages are increasing at the rate that price that homes are increasing, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Shared ownership is a debt trap. When you go to buy the remainder, what happens is they dictate the price. All right, they dictate the price to you. And in some cases, they call it staircasing. In some cases, what they do is they might even slow the process down.
Service charge goes up and up and up each year, catches a lot of people out. Rent can obviously go up. Mortgages, you just got to deal with that.
I moved into my shared ownership flat 2 years ago and I do regret it now.
Shared ownership traps buyers into an unbearable reality.
Shared ownership is a scam. So I bought my shared ownership property 3 years ago now. They valued the property at £375,000. The property was nowhere near worth £375,000.
The more stories I read of these shared ownership homes, the more insane the whole thing is. It sounds like a pyramid scheme, just scam on top of scam on top of scam.
People who bought homes through shared ownership in the UK are finding out the hard way that in reality, it was just a scheme for housing associations to steal from those who already didn't have much.
Shared ownership? Boy, let me sip my tea for this one.
Welcome back to Broken Britain, where we call out the scams dressed up as solutions. And today, we're talking about shared ownership, the scheme they sold us as a lifeline, but feels more like a trap. Because let's be honest, this isn't affordable housing. It's just another way to lock ordinary people into sky-high rents, endless service charges, and a mortgage on something they don't even fully own. People were promised stability, security, a pathway to owning a home. Instead, they're drowning in fees, repairs, and rising costs, all while being told this is helping first-time buyers. So hit that subscribe button, because today on Brit Rants, we're asking the real question: how did shared ownership become the biggest housing con in modern Britain?
The pros and cons of shared ownership. Loads of people ask about shared ownership, so I'm here to tell you all about it. Basically, it's a scheme designed to help people get on the property ladder that can't afford to traditionally. You buy a certain percentage of the property, and because of this, the mortgage that you need is a lot smaller. The biggest pro, of course, is that you are getting on the property ladder, and over time you can increase your ownership all the way up to 100%. However, lots of negatives. Not only are you paying a mortgage, but you're also paying rent on the part of the property that you don't own, and usually service charge as well, because the property is usually leasehold. You have responsibility for 100% of the property, even though you don't own it all. But for me, the biggest problems come when you're selling. You can only sell either back to the shared ownership company that you bought it from originally, or back to somebody who is buying through the shared ownership scheme. Therefore, you're drastically reducing the number of buyers you can sell to, and you may end up stuck. Let me know your thoughts, and of course, follow for more.
Listen up, beeps. Shared ownership is a debt trap, right? You buy the place on a percentage, the remaining amount you have to pay rent on, and a lot of the cases they have admin fees. So it's rent plus admin fee, which is like 20, 50 quid or something like that, plus your mortgage that you've got, what you have to buy. And if you decide to buy the rest, and it sounds good that you can buy a percentage, get on the ladder, and then buy the remainder. But when you go to buy the remainder, what happens is they dictate the price. All right. They dictate the price to you. And in some cases, they call it staircasing. In some cases, what they do is they might even slow the process down, or even just to start the process, they might charge you a massive fee, like £1,000 fee just to start the process. They're going to impose other costs like solicitor costs to ask you to pay for their solicitors and stuff like that. It's very, very lengthy and difficult. And the thing is that you're on a back foot because they are calling the shots. You have to go for them. They have to give you a price, and they're not in a rush to sell. The more longer it takes to sell, the more expensive it is for you. So why would they be in a rush to sell it? Plus they earn rent off you. So the longer it takes, the more rent they're going to be earning off you. It is a trap. Shared ownership. Be careful.
My one-bed flat's service charge is now £16,000 a year. The more stories I read of these shared ownership homes, the more insane the whole thing is. It sounds like a pyramid scheme, just scam on top of scam on top of scam. How do you even justify doing this? A lady bought a flat in King's Cross, North London, which is normally a good thing, but because she did it through shared ownership, she's paying rent, a mortgage, and service charges for the building. They told her one day that her service charge is going to rise from £4,200 a year to almost £16,000 without explaining properly why. In business, we normally say it's better to own a small percent of something great instead of 100% of nothing at all. But that does not apply for some of these shared ownership housing schemes. This is simply just not a good way to get on the property ladder for people who are struggling to afford it. I'm sorry. I get the idea behind a scheme, a single house is too expensive for one person, so therefore split the ownership into chunks and everybody buys a bit. But then, because of that, people are paying rent as well as mortgage, and now service charges that can just be arbitrarily increased with absolutely zero oversight. That's ridiculous.
Shared ownership is a scam. So I bought my shared ownership property 3 years ago now. They valued the property at £375,000 and I was eligible to buy 25% of that. The property was nowhere near worth £375,000. But I was in a desperate situation and I just needed to get on the ladder. And at the time, I just wasn't thinking about reselling it. But now, 3 years later, I'd like to sell. But guess what? I'm fucking stuck. The property is obviously depreciated. It depreciated basically 20 grand as soon as I actually bought it. I put in about 15 grand. It's all gone. And if I sell it, I'm going to have to pay to sell it because it's depreciated. So I can't do anything. Plus, I can't rent it out and they won't let me go and get a mortgage at somewhere else. So I'm literally fucked. If you're thinking about doing shared ownership, be really, really careful. I wish someone had given me that kind of advice when I was looking into it. It ain't worth it. Keep saving.
Shared ownership is a scam. So shared ownership is basically where you own part of the property and then the rest of it is either owned by a housing association, council or another body. However, you are responsible for all the maintenance. You also pay a mortgage and you pay rent as well. And if you want to own more of it, so let's say you own 25% and now you want to own 50%, then you have to go through something called staircasing, where you then have to pay out for solicitor fees again, mortgage broker fees again, and other fees too that's associated with that. So I don't see much benefit to it. I know of people that have done it and it's worked out bad for them. So if you are looking to buy your first property to live in, stay away from shared ownership. There's other better schemes out there for you.
Thoughts on shared ownership? Okay, so shared ownership, 3 main costs to consider: rent, mortgage, and service charge. Service charge goes up and up and up each year, catches a lot of people out. Rent can obviously go up. Mortgages, you just got to deal with that. They go up and down, but you renegotiate those every maybe 2 or 5 years. So there is a relatively stable period to that. But certainly every year service charge goes up. In some parts of the country, house prices are extortionate. So shared ownership could be the only option available to someone to buy. So in that instance, it's fine. Just do your research into it. You need to speak to a broker beforehand to work out what your strategy is going to be with shared ownership. Are you going to be in it forever? Therefore, do you want to do staircasing to buy more of the property over time? Or is it going to be a stepping stone? So you're going to be in for a bit and then sell it. It just depends how much share you're going to buy to make that more strategically possible. But yeah, certainly do your research. Possibly selling can be an issue because you've got to sell it again through the shared ownership scheme. But speak to a broker, work out your strategy, and then be prepared with the costs and go from there. Competition for shared ownership properties is pretty severe, so actually getting one is difficult as well. But again, if it's the only solution to you, then look at it in great detail before you pull the trigger.
Does shared ownership work in London? London's housing market has been on a rocket ship for the past decade, resulting in extortionate prices and an even more grumpy than usual population. Given the need for cheap housing in the capital, the demand for affordable housing products has been growing significantly. Despite this, construction of new affordable housing units is down 88% since last year as a result of high construction costs and a lack of funding. In this video, we're going to provide an overview of shared ownership and some key considerations for those of you who are living in London. The information included in this video should not be considered financial advice, and before making any decision that impacts your financial future, make sure you consult a finance professional. Whilst the average house in the UK is now worth around about £300,000, in London it sits at £550,000. Given the average salary in the UK sits at around about £35,000, it is pretty clear that most people would struggle to buy a house outright in the capital. Those people who can are generally relying on external support, generally from parents. This also impacts shared ownership. Looking at the StairPay resident, the average shared ownership household income sits at around about £47,000. After some years of paying off the mortgage and building up their savings, this does mean that a strong proportion of people should be able to reach 100% outside of the capital. When you compare this with London, we can see that the average resident on StairPay earns around about £63,000. Given that houses cost around about £500,000 on average, if somebody wants to staircase to 100%, they would generally need to have a household income of around about £90,000. Of course, if you are bringing a second income into the equation, then this does become much more attainable. Despite this, given the fact that most properties in London are apartments, they will come with a service charge, which again makes it harder to save for that deposit. Generally speaking, most of the issues that we see with shared ownership are centered in the capital, where costs are just generally higher across the board. Ultimately, for the average person in the UK, it's very hard to reach 100% if you're living in London. But despite that, shared ownership is a really good option if you want to be spending less every month and building up a bit of equity in your property. After a few years, you can always sell the property to someone else. By doing this, you can lock in the savings that you've made by paying that mortgage over those years and move somewhere else where there's a lower property valuation. Ultimately, shared ownership in London is a more complex product. We're not saying that shared ownership in London is a bad idea, but if you are thinking that you want to get to 100% one day, you need to bear these points in mind, and you need to think about where your salary is going in the future. As always, if you are a resident of shared ownership, feel free to sign up to StairPay using the link in our bio and drop us a follow. And if you have any questions that we haven't answered already, just put them in the comments and we'll try and get to them in a future video.
Affordable housing is a scam, so shared ownership is a scam. And here's another victim who's paying 6,000 something pounds for service charge and is basically being held hostage because they're in a shared ownership. So the thing about shared ownership is that it's a double whammy. You've got all the problems of having a leasehold, and then you've got the problem of being a shared ownership as well on top of that. So basically you have to pay for rent and the mortgage element. Now this is where the scam gets interesting, right? When you go to sell, or if you try and buy the other portion of the mortgage, it's always at the current market value. It's not at the value that you bought it at, and it should be really. So for example, if it's £100,000, right, you bought it for £100,000, you buy a 20% share of it, and you spend 10 years paying that 20% share of it, thinking, okay, now that I've put I've got my deposit done because I paid it off, and I'm going to buy 80%, the remaining 80% off them, and it should be £80,000 because now I've got 20,000. Now I put that 20% deposit, I should be able to get a mortgage easily and just buy the whole thing. Yeah. The thing is that when you go to buy, all of a sudden you find out the property is worth a current market value of £200,000, not £100,000. So instead of £80,000, you have to now buy 160. And the same thing happens. Let's say if I got 50% of the share, all right, I'm thinking, well, I paid 50% of the share, decades passed on, and it was I owe 100. I need to pay basically another £50,000. What happens is that you end up finding out that actually it's not the 50% at current market value is not £50,000 anymore. It's £100,000. So bear in mind you've already paid 50, and then you thought that was half, and now you're going to pay another 50, but instead it's 100. So you can then go and get another 50 for another 25% share and so on, and you can do this endlessly. So. And on top of that, you're paying the mortgage and you're paying rent, which means you don't actually own the full home, which means someone else can dictate to you what you can and cannot do to the property. And if you, let's do extension, or if you make home improvements of any sort, it's just going to increase the value of the property. And if you increase the value of the property, you're increasing the value of the share that you don't own. And when you go to buy it, you're going to have to pay that increased amount of funds for that share. So if I do an extension and the house value goes up by 20 grand, well,
whatever the share is, if I got 20%, I have to pay 80% of that 20 grand now on top, even though it was money from my own pocket to do those renovations. So you can see it's a scam in every shape or form. And then you got all the whole, if you're buying a new build flat, I mean, new builds are expensive. That's a scam in itself. They're not affordable homing at all. And then you've got the case that it's a lease, if it's a flat, it's a leasehold. And, do we have to even go about leasehold and the service charges and the ground rent and so on, and how, as the years go on, the lease number goes down, and that becomes problematic when you go to sell. And then finally, it's shared ownership. So there's a triple whammy here. New build, you got the leasehold and shared ownership. Yeah, wow.
If they wanted to teach you, they would, but they won't. So I will. People who bought homes through shared ownership in the UK are finding out the hard way that in reality, it was just a scheme for housing associations to steal from those who already didn't have much. This has come after reports that service charges for those who bought under this scheme has increased by up to 430% in a single year. That's a hell of a lot of money. Bear in mind, in a lot of instances, you have to prove you earn no more than a certain amount to even qualify for one of these properties. I was singing from the treetops that people should be very, very careful when it comes to shared ownership, despite it being an affordable way for people to get on the property ladder. If you follow me, you know this. And it seems as though I was right, because housing associations in the UK are currently facing allegations that they missold their so-called affordable homes. But let's put the fact that they were marketed as affordable to the side for a moment. When you have a scheme that allows you to buy a part of a leasehold property that you live in, meaning you have to pay both a mortgage payment to your mortgage provider and rent, which is usually around 2.75 to 3% of the value of the share you don't own, to the housing association that owns the rest of the property, it was never going to end well. You have the worst of both worlds. And shared ownership homes can be some of the hardest properties to sell, leaving those with them to just suck it up and pay up if they can. But what is happening with the service charge on these shared ownership homes is honestly disgusting. Some of those who purchase these affordable shared ownership homes purchase these homes with monthly service charges as low as £120, which, while not ideal, you could live with. For some people though, those same charges have now risen to £650 per month. Someone please tell me what services you could possibly be offering to be charging £650 per month. That is practically another rental payment in itself. Paying that on top of a mortgage and rental payments is insane. They better be cleaning my house and cooking me 3 square meals a day for £650 a month. But the reality is that what was once considered to be an affordable way for people to purchase housing has ended up trapping people in debt, with the risk of not only losing their property, but all of the money that they've put into it. This is why I will always encourage people to buy properties completely if they can, or rent somewhere affordable. If you can't buy where you currently live, then try and move and buy somewhere more affordable. With the ability to work from home for many people, there is now more flexibility than ever before to live in places that previously wouldn't have been possible while keeping your job. But my question to you is, do you think there is such thing as affordable housing in the UK? Let me know in the comments.
Shared ownership. Sounds amazing, right? Buy a home for half the price. Well, not so fast. I'm an independent mortgage advisor, and here's what you need to know without the fluff. Shared ownership means you buy a percentage of a property, usually between 25 and 75%, and you pay rent on the parts you don't own. Sounds fair, it can be, but let's look at the full picture. Here are the pros. Smaller deposit, lower monthly costs compared to renting privately, and it helps first-time buyers get on the property ladder faster. But here's where it gets tricky. You still pay 100% of the maintenance, even if you only own 25%. Rent, that usually increases every year. Want to own more of the property later? That process is called staircasing, and it can be expensive. And when it's time to sell, it's often not as straightforward as you'd expect. So, is shared ownership a good idea? It can be if it suits your situation, but it's not the still people think it is. If you're considering it, don't guess, ask. Drop a comment, DM me, or hit the link in my bio for a proper chat. No sales pitch, just honest advice.
I moved into my shared ownership flat 2 years ago and I do regret it now. The reason being I've lost my first time buyer status and I had no idea how important this was until now, because I'm now looking at houses, we're planning on buying a house, and oh my gosh, the stamp duty amounts have just shocked me. If I was a first time buyer still and buying a 500k house, my stamp duty will only be 3,750. That's if I was buying before the 1st of April. If I bought it after the 1st of April, obviously you guys probably have heard of the rule changes, my stamp duty would actually be 10k. But guys, the difference between being a first time buyer and not a first time buyer is crazy. If I was moving home, so I sold this flat and then bought a 500k house as a second time buyer, I would be paying 12,500 before the 1st of April and 15,000 after the 1st of April. But the maddest increase is if I was keeping this flat and then buying my house, I would have to pay £37,500 in stamp duty before the 1st of April and 40,000 after the 1st of April. So my original plan was to staircase this flat to 100%, rent it out and then buy a house. If I was going to do that, I would have to have £40,000 to spend on stamp duty alongside my 50k deposit for the house. So that's 90k in total. That means me and my partner would have to save up £45,000 each in order to keep this flat, rent it out and buy our 500k house, which is just insane. That is not something that we could do, especially because we are planning on having our Hindu wedding next year, which will be quite expensive. If you are thinking of buying a flat, please just make sure you have taken into account how stamp duty will affect you when it comes to buying your second property, because losing the first time buyer status is huge.
Shared ownership traps buyers into an unbearable reality. This is what was said by MPs who criticised the government on their shared ownership scheme. Shared ownership was meant to be a way for first-time buyers to jump on the property ladder in an affordable way by part buying a property, and as they earn more money, they could purchase more shares of that property, which is called staircasing. 200,000 people signed up to a shared ownership scheme according to a survey. And it has been recently criticised so much in recent weeks. The reason being is because all those people that signed up may never be able to fully own the property due to all of the costs that surround shared ownership. The service charges, the maintenance costs, and also the complex lease. Because it has been criticised in the last few months pretty fiercely by the 200,000 people that have signed up to the shared ownership scheme, as well as MPs, they are looking into possible solutions. They might actually start capping the service charge, and when it comes to the maintenance cost, what they're saying is actually you will only pay the share that you own rather than 100%. So at the moment, if something goes wrong with the property, it is the shared ownership's responsibility to pay for all of that. Whereas what the reform is saying is that you'll only pay for the share that you own.
They don't want us to be like the 1%, but I do, so let's talk. So here are 3 reasons why I would never ever buy a shared ownership property. And if my siblings or my little cousins ever told me that they were thinking about buying a shared ownership property, I genuinely would fight them. Personally, I feel like it's such a scam. So shared ownership is a government-backed scheme to allow more people to buy a property by purchasing a share of that property, and the shares are usually 25 to 75%. So here are 3 reasons as to why I personally would never buy shared ownership. So 1, you are paying rent and mortgage. So let's say you own 25% share. On that 75% that you don't own, you're paying rent. And then on top of that, you're paying a mortgage. So you're essentially paying more than if you were to rent or if you were to go down the traditional mortgage. So that to me just doesn't make any sense. Why not just rent, or why not just, when you have enough deposit, buy a deposit? But to do both at the same time, that reason alone would just put me off. Number 2, service charge and fees can be really high. So typically shared ownerships are in new builds, and new builds come with high maintenance costs. And who pays it? Not the government, the person who owns the small share of that property. And the cost can be really high. So you're paying for things like a gym or any services in the building, maintaining the property, for example lifts, service charge, that can be really high, and it's determined by the owner of that property, because essentially it's usually a leasehold. You don't really find shared ownerships that is a freehold. So the person that owns the freehold can determine how much or how little the service charge is, and it can fluctuate year on year. So the fact that you're paying mortgage, rent, service charge, and any other fees. The outgoings must be so high just on this one property. And lastly is staircasing costs, which can be really high. So if you want to increase your percentage from 25% to 30%, then there's costs that come with this, which includes legal costs, valuation fees, and any potential price hike. So price hikes is when you want to increase your share, the price of the additional share is based on the new current value. So for example, if you bought a 25% share and the price of the property was 300k, but you want to increase your share to 30% and the value of the property has increased to 350k, this now means that the additional 5% will now be based on the new value, so will now be based on the 350k, not the 300k that you originally bought the house for. So you're essentially paying much more over time as you want to continue to grow your shares. So if you are thinking about shares ownership, then please do your research. There are so many. This was 3 out of the whole list that I have. And if you want me to do another video, I will happily do another video on why I would never buy a shares ownership. But please do your research. That's all you can do. Is once you've done your research and you feel comfortable with your decision, then you'll have no regrets. But you have to do your research.
Now, I'm not one to make complaint videos, but I've absolutely had enough with Asta Home Cares. We are in a shared ownership house, so we own half the house, they own half the house, we pay rent, they put on unbelievable charges because they own half of it, but obviously if anything breaks, we own it, so it's not ours, but if they want anything extra done, they own it, so we have to do it. We are currently arguing about this piece of land here. These 4 trees, as you can see, I live right next door to Asta. There are their vans. That is their offices. That is their building. That is my house through there. Okay. You can see this hedge that they refuse to cut, which is going into our land. We mow this area, and we have been maintaining it for 4 years. 4 years. Year 1 and 2, they charged us ground maintenance that they refunded because no work was done. Amazing. Great. Year 3, they decided not to charge us grounds maintenance because, oh yeah, no work would be completed. Year 4, they try and charge us a grounds maintenance. I say, I'm not paying it unless you tell me what you plan to do. What are you going to carry out? They say, these are all the grounds maintenance for things that we do around the UK. All of them. It might be one of these 30 items that could be done. Maybe, if they bother coming. When actually what they do is they mow up to their border, up to their line. They literally stop right here. I've spoke to the gardener and he said, yeah, he has stopped there for the last 4 years because he lets us maintain this because there's no point. There was a vintage car behind there. He didn't want to damage it. And it's such a small patch of grass. Why charge for it? Now we owe them £100 because they want us to pay for last year's work that was carried out. That no work was carried out. But they said, it's okay, pay that charge. They'll then work out if any work was carried out and then refund it back to our account if they find out no work was carried out. But I'm telling you, no work was carried out. But they're insisting that we pay that charge for them to just refund it in September. We've gone back and forwards and they still cannot tell me what the budget is based on. According to them, they have no data to base it on because there was no work done for 3 years. So they're guessing. They had to just predict a number based on other estates. I said, why don't you just pop round? Why don't you just look through your window, send a van round or something and assess it before you start making those kind of budgets? They said no, because that would charge extra. Or we'd have to pay someone to come and see it. I said, oh, they could just look through the hedge. They could. They could just look through the hedge. Or every other time that they come, because apparently they come 3 monthly. They could have done it then.
Shared ownership. Should you buy a shared ownership property? Well, my name is Sarah Hayati. I am a qualified financial advisor and I'm here to make money make sense and help you. So, shared ownership. How does it work? Quite simply, in a nutshell, you buy a house and you buy a portion of that house. So let's go 50-50. You buy 50%, you rent 50%. The 50% that you're renting is from a housing association and you pay them a market rent for that part. Now, this is the ugly part of it that people might not always tell you, especially if there's something in it for them, where here, there's nothing in it for me apart from giving you information and helping you. And I might miss things from time to time because TikTok doesn't give us the space to be fully informative. But if I have missed something, this is a discussion. Stick it in the comments below. So shared ownership, let's say you buy 50% of it. You've got a mortgage, so there's pounds out. You're also going to have rent, so that's pounds out. But because you're renting it, you have to pay the management fee, so that's also pounds out because you own some of it. My opinion is that shared ownership is backbreaking. Everyone and anyone that I've ever spoken to that has a shared ownership is under a lot of pressure and they feel severely trapped because they've gone into it. They want to get out of it and they can't get out of it for a few reasons. One is that you've fixed your mortgage and now you've got early repayment charges. So you're not going to be able to walk away from it as if you were a tenant. But you're also not going to be in a position to rent it out. Like I explained in my last video, you buy a house, your intention changed, and now you want to rent it out. But you can't because this one doesn't entirely belong to you or give you the freedom to do that. So you're going to have early repayment charges. Also, generally, the shared ownerships are new build properties, and new build properties come with a premium. And if those prices drop, then you're also stuck in a very sticky situation. Apart from that, the only reason why somebody would take a shared ownership is if you are unable to get a mortgage for the higher amount because of criteria, and you need a house that's got more room, then you go for a bigger property, not necessarily a house, it could be a flat as well, but you want something bigger, but you can't afford to get the mortgage for the whole amount. It does beg the question though, if you can't afford to get the mortgage for the whole amount, but you can afford to rent, how is it that this method is good for you? Like if your income is affordable to take a mortgage and pay the rent, then why can't you have a mortgage for the whole amount? And that's the way that banks work and the way that brokers may explain it to you. I personally think that if it's affordable, then you should be able to take it out on a mortgage and then you own the whole place. But if you can't, then shared ownership is a scheme that's available. Do I like it? Honestly, not really. But that's my choice. If you are in this discussion, then tell us a good experience if you've had a shared ownership, and tell us your bad experiences if you've had a shared ownership, because the purpose of this content is to start a discussion so that we can all share experiences and help each other out. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, give me a like, give me a share, give me a follow.
Okay, let's talk about shared ownership. Shared ownership sounds like a smart way to get onto the ladder, but I've seen people walk away with almost nothing. So here's what can go wrong. I heard about a case where the seller had to staircase just to get the sale through. But after redeeming the mortgage, paying legal fees for both the sale and the staircasing element, covering the housing association's solicitors' fees, estate agents' fees, and extra solicitors' costs because the building was affected by the Building Safety Act. I will cover that act in a later video. He even had to use a credit card to cover some of it. So that's how tight things got. He didn't have to pay stamp duty because the staircasing and sale happened at the same time, but he was still charged to submit the return to HMRC. So essentially, it all adds up fast. I mean, it's not always like this, but shared ownership isn't full ownership. And I don't know, again, how much I must emphasize that the importance of reading and fully understanding your lease and the report that your solicitor gives you about that shared ownership lease. The report should break down what you're really signing yourself up to, and it can save you from surprises later.
Here are the cons of shared ownership. Mortgage availability. Not all lenders offer mortgages for shared ownership. However, the majority will. Ground rent and service charge. You have to pay 100% of the ground rent and service charge for the property, irrespective of how low your share is. Leaseholds. All properties purchased through the scheme are leasehold properties. This may not necessarily be a negative, but it's always good to know. Limits on selling. If you wanted to sell your property, you may find that your options are limited due to the restrictions for who can buy your home. This makes it difficult to sell your property quickly. Asking permission. If you wanted to make any improvements to your property or any changes structurally, you may need permission from your housing association before doing so. Staircasing costs money. As well as saving up multiple deposits, you would also be required to pay legal, survey, and mortgage fees each time you want to staircase. Whilst with a conventional mortgage, you only pay these costs once. Rules. You may find that there are rules to shared ownership, like no pets or tenants. Shared ownership is a scheme aimed to increase affordable housing, but it can be argued how affordable it really is. So it's very important before deciding on any scheme that you do your due diligence and your research. Look at the pros and cons and decide whether it's right for you. Comment below if there's any other schemes you want me to look into. But until then, follow for more property and saving content.
Shared ownership, is it something that is worth it? Is it not worth it? Specifically to mums. If you're a mum and you're on the property ladder and you have a house, I'm looking more so for a house in the flat. Is shared ownership worth it? Now, I hear from people that are in that situation that it's better than renting. And if that is their affordability, then perfect, because you'd rather own part of something than own nothing by privately renting. However, the idea of staircasing is amazing. I love it. But with the way that wages are increasing at the rate that price that homes are increasing, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I feel like people could get stuck in that. Also, it's just, is it worth it? Is it worth it? In this economy, is it worth it? Or is it, especially with the new build? I mean, I'd take a new builder over having to renovate a place, because I just don't think I have it in me to renovate a place right now, or in the next year or 2 years or 3 years or however long it takes. That's the first thing. And secondly, homes that were built donkey's years, they typically, especially in London, they typically have a ridiculous amount of mold in. And I just about got a grip on my respiratory health because my immunity declined quite a lot during pregnancy, and I had 2 under 2. So is it something, am I willing to take the risk? Because most of them have an EPC rating of A or B, which really is just perfect. But is it worth it? Is it worth for peace of mind? But is it really peace of mind if you have to pay mortgage and rent? Oh, I don't know. Any mums out there, just let me know what your opinion is, what your thoughts are, what your experiences are. If you've gone through it, going through it now, you know, I don't know. And is it even worth purchasing anything lower than 25%? Because at that point, what's the point? I reckon 50% and above, really, ideally 75 would be great. And apparently lenders aren't looking to lend to shared ownerships as well, I hear. Oh, being an adult is just so much work.
What do you think about shared ownership? Could you do a video on that? Shared ownership? Boy, let me sip my tea for this one. I didn't realize with shared ownership that you have to pay rent as well as the mortgage. I remember I was watching a video a couple of years ago, and there was one black girl I used to see on the bus. She used to go to a different school to man, but I remember her. And yeah, she was doing a video about shared ownership, so she must have bought a property. There's no way it's in Edmonton, but she bought a property somewhere, but it was shared ownership. And I remember she was talking about, yeah, the mortgage is like £600, but the rent is like 900. I said, what? I said, nah, fam. Nah. And then obviously some of them got some mad service charges in it. But let's say, for whatever reason, shared ownership is your last and only option, yeah? Like, well, shared ownership is the only option, is the only avenue for at this moment in time. Then boy, do it. It's better to get on a property ladder to not be on a property ladder. It's better to own a piece of a pie than own no pie at all. So it's up to you. Like, if you want to jump on shared ownership and that's up to you. But let's say you're living at your parents' house. You have a good situation with your parents. You don't have to contribute that much rent. Because there's some extortionist parents out here that want £600 from their youths and that. No. Well, my mum never charged me them mad monies and that, but I'll get onto that in a sec. If you're living at your parents' house and that, and you're only contributing a little $250 and that, and you got a decent paying job and you can save money and that, don't get onto shared ownership. Just buy a rental property. Like I said, if you're living at your parents' house and that, buy a rental property. You don't even need to buy your own property. Buy a rental property, rent that out. Yeah, I just wouldn't recommend getting on the shared ownership ladder thing if you don't have to. But yeah, like I was saying about these parents that extort their youths and that, my mum only used to charge me £250. And some people are like, oh man, you was getting away with murder, not having to give your mum that much money because I was on a decent wage. Like when mum was 21, 22, mum was on 1,800, yeah? But the thing is, I was giving my mum 200, 250 and that. But remember, there was no Mercedes outside. There was my little shitty Honda Civic that I was driving that I bought for 1,700. I wasn't going to this country, going to that country. You wasn't seeing me dripped out. I wasn't wearing no fucking Dior trainers. I'm not saying they were out back then, but you understand what I'm trying to say. I wasn't wearing no expensive clothes. I was really frugal with my money. So yeah, why not give my mum 200, 250 and that? Now if I was driving a big car outside and I was spending mad money and that and just wasting money, then yeah, why not? But I was saving, so I don't feel like I needed to be contributing anymore, to be fair anyway, because man was just still living like I was an apprentice, like I say in some of my videos and that. But yeah, if you're desperate to get out of your parents' house or whatever, some mad situation, or you're paying rent to a landlord, then yeah, if your only option is shared ownership, then jump on the shared ownership ladder, innit? But that has to be a last resort. That has to be your only option. Yeah, I just don't recommend getting on the shared ownership and that. A lot of people talk about, the right to buy was a scam and that. I don't know, I ain't looked into it too much, but I know a couple of people that do have right to buy properties. But at the same time, if that was their only option at the time, then it's better to get on the property ladder than not ever be on the property ladder and be throwing money at a landlord and you don't get nothing in return. All right, yeah, you get a roof over your head, but long term, you don't get nothing in return. So, yeah, like I said, if shared ownership is your only option, then do it. But if you can stay at your parents' house and save up, buy a rental property and rent that out, man. Save up your money, buy a rental property and rent that out. Forget this shared ownership thing, man. That's a last resort.
So, want to know why I really don't like shared ownership? Firstly, you're technically still a tenant. Stamp duty, normally you would qualify for a first-time buyer exemption, but not with shared ownership. You'll have to pay a service charge to cover all the maintenance in the communal parts of the building. So another thing, all sharehold properties are leasehold, and unless you own the property 100%, you cannot sublet the property.
Let's break down what's really happening behind the polished brochures and government slogans. Over the last few years, shared ownership rents and service charges have climbed by 8 to 12% annually, far outpacing wage growth. Many homeowners are paying over £700 a month in rent alone, on top of a mortgage. And the service charges? They've jumped by hundreds, with some households reporting increases of 30% or more in a single year. And here's the catch. Unlike normal homeowners, shared ownership buyers are often responsible for 100% of repairs, even when they own as little as 25% of their home. Boilers break, roofs leak, damp spreads, and people are left footing bills that push them closer to debt. Meanwhile, housing associations and developers continue expanding the scheme because it's incredibly profitable. Guaranteed rent, rising fees, and properties that remain part-owned for decades. People feel trapped, unable to staircase because prices keep rising, unable to sell because buyers get scared off by the small print, families are stressed, young couples feel tricked, and thousands of people are now realising they've signed up for a system designed to benefit everyone except them. And yet politicians still call this affordable. But let's be honest, affordability isn't about owning 25% of a home and 100% of the problems. It isn't about schemes that exploit desperation. And it isn't about trapping people in contracts they can't escape. The solution is clear. We need transparent costs, fair repair responsibilities, caps on rent hikes, and housing policies that actually prioritise citizens over corporate gain. Because this isn't just a housing issue, it's a moral one. If we don't fix this now, shared ownership won't just be a warning. It'll be a symbol of everything that's gone wrong in broken Britain.